Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Happy Thursday. Jason Davis here with you. We are back. It is 10 o'clock on the East Coast. That means we have started Soccer Morning. We are a go. We're ready for launch. Whatever cheesy line I can squeeze in here this morning. Welcome into the show. First things first, our Indiegogo campaign is now officially over and done with. That means you won't hear any more about it after this, in which I thank you again for contributing, if you are one of those people who did. If you spread the word, I thank you for that as well. We reached our goal and then some, and it was a humbling, amazing response by everybody out there who helped Soccer Morning for 2014, and now we're ready to just move forward. And speaking of moving forward, today's show is jam-packed with excellent stuff. And in less than 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes, if I can talk, Brooke Tunstall, the writer of the undergrads in MLS and the draft piece at American Soccer Now will join us. I should have written down the title. I don't have it right here. Regardless, we've talked about it briefly on this show. If you listen to last night's Best Soccer show, we talked about it there as well. We'll get Brooke's insight into the story he wrote, the reporting he did, exactly why MLS does what they do with undergrads. We're going to talk to Eric Gomez today, our friend down in Mexico, get his insight into the push-pull of the Camilo fallout. Rumors that were mentioned on this show of Cruz Azul going after an American-based target, an MLS-based target, say it that way. I suppose it's possible this player is based in Canada. And the issue being the precedent set by Camilo in ignoring or making issue of his unilateral option, which MLS may or may not want to try to defend. So that's an interesting discussion we'll have with Eric Gomez at the bottom of the hour. We'll also ask him a little bit about the start of the Liga MX Clausura season. That's underway week 3, I think. Week 4, we're right in that range right there for Liga MX. We'll talk to him about that. And at the top of the hour, 11 o'clock, Dave Kaval, the president, president of the San Jose Earthquakes, will join us, talk a little stadium, talk a little bit about his brand positioning, because that's a thing that you have to talk about in the modern football world. We'll touch on some of those issues that the Earthquakes face, not only in their market in San Jose as they try to build a stadium and they've had delays and the like, but sort of in MLS in general. I'm interested to get a president's perspective on the quote-unquote new MLS. The MLS where Toronto FC spends $100 million on 2 players. That MLS. How does San Jose compete with that? What do they need to do? And remember, they're less than 2 years removed from a supporter shield. Last year didn't go so well. Mark Watson is now their permanent head coach. We'll talk about what that means for San Jose as well. All right. So the phone lines are open here right now as we start off. 347-756-6276. 2 stories, two things I have to touch on at the top of the show to get us underway. Number 1, this Barcelona controversy, the scandal that's happening over the Neymar transfer, which is the fallout is pretty insane at this point. Right now, what's being reported is that Sandro Rosell, the president of the club, will be stepping down over this Neymar transfer. And the bottom line, the best I can understand it, we continue to look for somebody who's following La Liga very closely to give us some insight into this. But from what we can tell, it boils down to Barcelona reporting that they paid 57 million euros for Neymar, when in fact their outlay was more like 95 million euros. So it seems to be this is obviously about accounting and disclosure, and this is a public club. This is a club owned by its members. There's obviously some shenanigans happening there. There's an investigation going on in Spain right now that's kicking off right now with a Madrid-based court. And Sandro Rosell, in order to try to deflect some of the criticism that Barcelona is facing right now, is going to step aside. What impact that has on this, I'm not sure. He's going to resign. What exactly does that mean for Barcelona? What exactly does that do for the court case? If they're going to pin this all on Rosell and that's it, we'll move on. Everybody's just ignore what happened. Ignore the extra money that went to Neymar's dad, as much as 8.5 million euros. Ignore the 8 million euros that went to Santos for the rights to 3 other players. Ignore the $10 million signing bonus and the $9 million for the friendly. I mean, I don't know if this stuff is not disclosed. Again, that seems to be the issue that Barcelona is facing, and this is to the point that I've seen some tweets, and I have no way to corroborate any of this, but I've seen some tweets that this could potentially result in a ban in Europe and those kind of things. That potential fallout would be disastrous for Barcelona, certainly disastrous for their image, and could have larger ramifications in Spain as well. All right. The other thing I wanted to touch on before we get to Brooke Tunstall is the Deloitte Money League. The rankings came out. This is the annual report by Deloitte that is that lists the richest clubs in the world. Let me say it that way. The clubs that bring in the most revenue in the world. This year, no change at the top. Real Madrid number 1, Barcelona number 2, Bayern Munich jumps over Manchester United for the 3rd spot. Manchester United drops down to 4th. PSG, big jump from 10 to 5. Shows you what they're doing. Their revenues, 398.8 million euros. Last year's revenue, 220.5 million euros. This is 2011 and 12 versus 2012-13. So this is always based on last year. Now, the PSG has gone out and spent. They have Qatari backers. They are buying players of extreme high caliber in an attempt to not only win Ligue 1 again, not only back that up, which they did last year, the first title in 19 years, but they're also trying to go and make noise in Europe and become one of the biggest clubs on the continent. And revenue isn't directly tied to that, but it is clearly an indicator of how effective they are in spreading the name of the club. And when you sign Zlatan Ibrahimovic and you bring in Edinson Cavani and you do these things and make yourself clearly among the class of Europe, there's going to be a return on it. Manchester City at 6. That's a move up of 1 spot for them. Chelsea 7, Arsenal, Juventus, AC Milan, Dortmund, Liverpool, Schalke, Tottenham, Inter, Galatasaray, Hamburg, Fenerbahce, AS Roma, and Atletico Madrid. So there's your top 20. The last 3, Fenerbahce, Roma, and Madrid, are new to the list. I mean, I think it's odd. No, I get it. These are just reporting on the part of Deloitte, but it's odd. It's odd that we almost think of these things as they almost justify these clubs. I mean, they make these clubs they give them even more cachet than they already have. These are the richest clubs in the world, clearly, and there's nothing wrong with reporting the numbers. But at the same time, it's this perverse notion that you want to be on the Deloitte money list because it indicates your ability to win games. And for as an American, and maybe it's not unique to Americans, but I think that's where it comes from for me. There's certainly some distaste over it. I just, your ability to spend money should not always dictate your ability to win. It shouldn't. I mean, I guess we all want to see greatness out there, but this is a sport, as so many have been over the years, that traditionally was built on what can you develop yourself? What can you do with the kids in your area? Or go out and send your scouts out and identify that talent and bring it in and teach those kids how to play, and then go win something. If your notion of winning a title is based on the idea that you're going to create an all-star team from around the world of players who have already made their name somewhere else, this is why people don't like Chelsea and people don't like Manchester City. People don't like the Yankees. This is why they have this attitude. And I don't know that you can stop it, but it certainly doesn't seem exactly right, does it? No. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, Brooke Tunstall, the gentleman who wrote the piece at American Soccer Now on undergrads in the MLS draft, will join us. We'll go through his reporting, what exactly it means that MLS does this. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Stay right there. Back on Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Jason Davis, joined on the telephone by Brooke Tunstall. The gentleman responsible for the piece, Does MLS Block College Underclassmen from the Draft, over at American Soccer Now. Definitely go read this piece. It's right there in the top banner of stories. You can't miss it. Brooke, how are you?
I'm doing well. Well, actually, I'm recovering from a cold, so I might sound like death while I talk to you.
You know, as long as your words are intelligible, that's all we care about. Brooke, you wrote this piece. Let me start with, and I've talked about this on a couple of different shows already. That's how fascinated I am by the story. It didn't occur to me. Like, none of this ever occurred to me, and I think that's a failing on my part. But how did the idea to write this story come about?
Well, interestingly, none of it ever occurred to me either. And, well, it occurred to me for a while, but it hadn't occurred to anybody I talked to, because when I would raise it, people were like, gosh, I don't know. And it sort of seemed like it was one of those issues that has just sort of fallen through the cracks and never been addressed. I called MLS, and they were kind of flummoxed that I was asking, and there was a lot of scrambling and getting people, we'll have to check and get back to you.
Right.
And then I called, the NCAA, and they were, well, we don't know. And then I called the union, and they were like, what? I mean, the union was. I mean, they said, it's not.
We're talking about
not against the CBA. That's all we can.
Yeah. We're talking about the players' union, not the team. The union, just to be clear.
Yes, absolutely. The Major League. That was Bob Coos. I spoke to the head of Major League Soccer Players Union, and he was like, that would be an MLS policy. And what honestly, the origin of this for me was, I'm a big fan of college soccer. Let me preface by saying that, and I think college soccer gets slighted a lot, where we just kind of blame the problems we have as a development, from a soccer development perspective on college soccer.
Sure.
And I don't think it gets enough credit for the good things it does. Having said that, there is no question in my mind that the best players should turn pro when they are ready and want to. They should be in pro environments. And if there is a demand for them and they want to go, they should be able to have an option to play, to say, I would like to play in Major League Soccer. And then it becomes up to the free market, just like any other job that you want. Right. You have to apply for, and either you get it or you don't. And so what kind of hit me was MLS was doing that 24 under 24 series.
Right.
And as an addendum to that, they did one where they had, who are current college players who we think will be on this list a year from now. And one of the players that they listed was Robbie Christo, a forward from St. Louis. He's a junior, and he's a two-time All-American, 2013 and 2012, 6'4", good feet. And then Generation Adidas announcements come out, and there's no mention of Robbie Christo, right? So I'm curious, why wouldn't they sign Robbie Christo? Does he want more money? Is he going to Europe? So I call St. Louis. I talk to their coach, and he says, well, lots of MLS coaches would call, and said they were interested, but we never heard a thing from the league. So I talked to the kid, and he's like, yeah, I was disappointed not to hear from the league. I would have liked to have at least had the chance to see if I wanted to go pro, if MLS teams were interested in them, especially since my coach was telling me that there was interest from MLS teams.
Hey, Brooke, let me stop you for just a second. I mean, obviously the story of the kid from St. Louis is germane to the piece that you wrote, but I want to lay out sort of the nuts and bolts of this, just so people understand what we're talking about. The premise is laid out in the title of the story. Does MLS block college underclassmen from the MLS draft? The basic answer is yes, they do, except for exceptional cases. And as far as I can tell, the only underclassmen that get into MLS as underclassmen are the GA kids, the Generation Adidas signings. There were 7 this year who are underclassmen. That's the designation they're given. They're given a special contract. It's go look into the history of Generation Adidas and Project 40 and all of those programs to understand that. And then underclassmen who are tied to an academy can be signed as homegrowns. That's the only way you can get into MLS as an underclassman, except for, and we'll get to the interesting things that are happening right now in a little while. Correct?
Yes. The first question when I asked MLS, can underclassmen declare for the draft? The answer I was given from an MLS spokesperson who asked not to be identified, which I thought was curious, was that it is MLS policy to not allow unsigned, I mean, if they haven't signed a contract with MLS, unsigned underclassmen from declaring for the draft.
Now, is that because, in your opinion, and through the process of writing this, did you come to the conclusion that that's for this altruistic, we don't want to hurt eligibility reason that they gave, or is this a cost control reason?
I believe it is a cost control reason. And it's twofold. One, they would have to spend more money on scouting, and that's not something I touched on in the interview, but the MLS scouting is fairly bare bones as it is, and they rely on a network of a lot of the coaches rely on people that they don't know. They call, or they know, and they call, and they haven't actually seen the player, or they rely on video. If you start including underclassmen in the draft, they have to scout more. That's obviously a bigger cost. The second issue is that if you're an unsigned underclassman and you get drafted just like an unsigned senior, we've seen this a couple of times in MLS. I think a recent example, not recent, but a high-profile example was Canadian international Olivier Ocean was drafted by the Metro Stars when Bob Bradley coached them, and he went with them. He was a senior, and he went with them to a tournament in Spain and did really well in the preseason. And one of the teams from Scandinavia that they played in the preseason totally like tripled what he was going to get from MLS. And so he signed with them. What they don't want are more situations like that where players say, if you don't draft me, there's a lot of unknowns for MLS. So if the player would have leverage, and almost everything about single entity in terms of dealing with the players is to try and eliminate whatever leverage the players have. And several of the agents I spoke to were like, if an underclassman were to declare for the draft and you could generate some interest from him from either the lower divisions in the United States or from abroad, you would be bargaining from a position of strength with MLS, where they would risk either losing the draft pick or.
Let me ask you a question specific to that, Brooke. And we're seeing this a little bit with what happened with Andre Lewis, although he's not a collegiate player, so that's notable.
Yeah, but similar to that.
But similar. Yeah, if college underclassmen suddenly decide, hey, I'm willing to go to the NASL to start my pro career, especially if they start offering, and I don't know how many NASL clubs can really do this, but especially if they start offering either competitive salaries or better salaries than what MLS can offer, that creates a problem for MLS. There's a potential to miss out because they're not going to allow those underclassmen to declare for their draft. They may miss out on them entirely. Is that something that eventually will push a policy change in MLS? Was that even something that came up at all?
Oh, in terms of policy change, I can't speak to that because when I asked Bob Foose from the union, he said, we haven't decided what we're going to be pushing for. And as I hinted at the article, he didn't seem to make it sound like it was a high priority. That doesn't mean it won't be addressed. And I don't think MLS will feel a need to address it unless there's just a lot of players that suddenly start doing it. Clearly, they would react if they started losing some of their better players to competition, like if the Cosmos started bidding for better underclassmen, which they would be absolutely within their rights to do. And that would, I get the feeling that the Cosmos really like tweaking MLS.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So wouldn't surprise me if they did do something like this. How would MLS react to it? I can't say because that would just be speculation. What I would like to see is just a broader policy that lets more underclassmen have more options. And I can understand why MLS wants the cost certainties, the cost controls that come along with this. So I respect that, but I'd like to see some options where the kids have more choices about turning pro when they're ready. And the way Generation Adidas works is MLS gets a budget of a few $100,000 that they are going to use to sign a handful of underclassmen, and they designate that as pot. Let's say it's, for sake of argument, let's say it's $500,000, and that's what they're going to use for Generation Adidas. Once they have used that $500,000, then they don't sign any more underclassmen. This year, apparently, whatever their dollar figure was, they reached that with 7 underclassmen. There's absolutely no way that you can tell me that there are only 7 underclassmen in the college ranks who are good enough to turn pro and are interested in doing so now. And again, I know this because I have talked to a lot of MLS coaches about this who didn't, but nobody wanted to go on record because they don't want to, look like everybody has to look like a team player.
They don't want to call from HQ is basically what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes. And, I talk to college coaches who say kid X is ready, kid Y is ready, and so the concern for a soccer fan, I think, should be, we make a big deal of the draft. Is the league getting the best players every year? And are the best players being put in the best developmental environment? And I think the answer to that is no. And that's unfortunate. And that's something that MLS should want to change. right? I mean, if your goal was to be the best, one of the best leagues in the world by 2022, why would you foster a system that doesn't get your top talent into the best environment for development as early an age as possible?
Absolutely. Let's talk about these two kids that have just been signed to MLS. It's been asked on Twitter. Two guys available in a special waiver draft, and we know MLS likes to create their rules when they feel the need is there. And in your piece, it's Giuseppe Gentile and Cristiano Francois. And in your piece, you actually address, at least in Francois' case, the reason he's eligible now to be in MLS. It's interesting. It's happening after the draft. We'll get to that in a second. If a player signs with an agent or is academically ineligible, you have someone from MLS, the unidentified spokesperson, saying that they could be put on the draft eligible list then. And remember, you can only be drafted if you're on the draft eligible list that MLS puts together.
Correct.
So in this case, this seems like an end run or policy that MLS has. Like they're sort of skirting their own policy to get Francois and Gentile into the league. I don't know why.
I'm sure.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
No, Brooke, go ahead.
I assume that if you asked MLS, and let me preface that by saying that I have not. This news broke last night, so I didn't have a chance to deal with it. And I was on the phone this morning trying to find some information out, and I haven't gotten it yet. But I assume that if you asked MLS, that they would tell you that these players signed after the draft, and that may in fact be true that they signed after the draft. But there's no way you can credibly claim that Francois did not meet the criteria that MLS said in the story to be in the draft, because he played in 2012 at Maryland as a freshman and did pretty well. And then he sat out last year because he didn't make grades. He was academically ineligible. Mm-hmm. And then he did not get academically eligible after that one semester, so it became pretty obvious. He's only been in the country a couple of years,
right?
Francois. He's Haitian, so I don't make it sound like he's dumb, because I mean, he may be, but I don't think it's an issue of him not being smart.
Right.
I think it's an issue of, Maryland is hard.
Adapting, yes.
And he doesn't speak English. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to slag on the kid, but it became pretty apparent that he wasn't going to qualify academically. So, and that did not just happen, yesterday. That's been known for a while, that, people I talked to that are tied into the Maryland soccer program were saying, because MLS, the kid, I forget his name, but Toronto just signed a 17-year-old to their academy. Mm-hmm. And he was a Maryland verbal commit, and he was expected to replace Patrick Mullins in the starting lineup as their kind of go-to goal scorer, because they're losing Mullins and Sheila Shuma, who also won in the draft as a Generation Adidas player. And so at first they were like, well, we'll have this kid and we'll have Francois, and so we'll be in good shape forward-wise. And then, the Canadian kid, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, signed with Toronto FC, and then they were like, well, Francois, now it's looking like Francois is not going to be academically eligible. So I have known about Francois' academic issues for 3 or 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what he wanted to do. I didn't know if he was considered good enough for MLS or if there was interest in him, so I didn't touch on him in the story. But based on the criteria that they gave, he should have been in the draft, i.e., no longer has academic eligibility, should have been draft eligible. He should have been exposed to all the teams to be able to use a SuperDraft pick on him.
Now, let me ask you a question. I only have like a minute left here, Brooke. And by the way, it's Jordan Hamilton, who was signed by a TFC as a homegrown player, who was a Maryland.
I apologize again.
No, absolutely. The last thing I'll say, in Francois' case, it's about academics, and he's ineligible, and he signed a contract with MLS. MLS, obviously, it's their prerogative to sign the kid and then make him available. Mm-hmm. Okay. What's to stop? And the other part of this is, if you lose your eligibility because you sign with an agent, what's to stop a sophomore or a junior from signing with an agent saying, I'm now ineligible because I've signed with an agent, and petitioning MLS to put him in the draft? And MLS can say no, right? I mean, that's the problem here, right? MLS can flat out say, no, we're not going to put you in our draft list. You won't be eligible. Now that may push the kid. Yes. That may push the kid to NASL, but it keeps MLS
Europe.
from losing.
What probably happened with Robbie Christo.
Okay, well, there you go.
And to be clear, Robbie Christo has not signed with an agent, but he's got all sorts of European options.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance for MLS between maintaining the leverage that they want to maintain to keep their salaries as low as possible, and also not losing out on some of the better talent who may find ways to. Well, I mean, look, if you have a passport, I think that you said the kid at St. Louis, Christo, has a European passport. He's got more options than most guys do. That most guys don't have that, and maybe that's what MLS is banking on. All right, we could do this all day. Unfortunately, I got to move on to other subjects. Brooke Tunstall, go read the piece at American Soccer Now. It's very fascinating. Does MLS block college underclassmen from the draft? Thanks for your time, Brooke. I appreciate it, man.
Jay, it's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Let's take a break. When we come back, let's get Eric Gomez on the line. We'll talk Mexican soccer. We'll talk the battle that may break out between Liga MX teams and MLS teams over the unilateral option. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Back on Soccer Morning with American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Jason Davis here with you, and on the phone with me, good friend of the show, Eric Gomez, down south of the border, covering Mexican soccer. Hi, Eric. How are you?
Doing good. Chilly Mexico City morning. We've upgraded from cold to chilly, so not that bad.
What constitutes chilly in Mexico City? I'd be curious.
I mean, I'd say somewhere around the range of 50, 55 degrees.
Okay, that counts as chilly. Sure. I mean, it's like 10 degrees Fahrenheit where I am, Eric. But sure, 55 is chilly.
I've done my share of traveling. I've experienced sub-zero weather, so I'm not underselling the chilly.
I appreciate it. Yeah, look, it's all about what you're accustomed to, and I imagine 55 is not what you normally expect in Mexico City. All right, so we've grabbed Eric mostly because of the continuing fallout over the Camilo to Querétaro situation, and not necessarily because there's stuff to talk about with Camilo, although I am curious about what the actual fee is, Eric. But let me get to that in a second. The fallout is that this, and I think we all of us who observed both of these leagues closely thought that this might happen. You've reported, and you had on Twitter, you have sources that say Cruz Azul may take a run and do the same thing Querétaro did. That's not surprising, is it?
Not really, and I think this is actually all the more interesting because of the way that they conducted their off-season, and they brought in people like Jose Villarreal and, Rafael Baca.
Right.
Mexican-American guys from MLS, and now I believe strongly that they've learned a bit about the league's policies and the way that contracts are structured and so forth from basically talking to their players, to their new players. As the Querétaro situation unfolded, there were a lot of teams that were very, interested in monitoring that situation as closely as possible because, as we all know, there are several players that have been on the Mexican League's radar for some time that for some reason or another end up in MLS, or then you have cases like Gaston Fernandez, who played in Mexico for several years and is now in MLS. So there's a long history of association between the talent that goes in and out of both leagues. Now, the issue here is Cruz Azul is just a team that revels in giving mixed messages to media and fans.
I don't know. What is that? What are you being attacked? What's happening?
Well, I should mention that I am at Cruz Azul's training ground, La Noria, and that's right by the highway. So whenever you get a big truck going by, they'll sound that amazingly loud horn.
All right. So anyway,
go ahead.
Yeah. Cruz Azul and mixed media messages.
Mixed media messages in the sense that they do have a couple of foreign spots available for them, but they said in recent days that they wouldn't sign anybody else. Now, this comes literally about 6 or 8 hours after we hear that press conference. I have a very, very reliable source telling me that's not true. They're going after at least a couple of guys, and one of those players is in MLS. Now, I was not privy to who that person is, but as I mentioned over Twitter, it's a player that might have a contract situation similar to what Camilo had in Vancouver.
And that situation is, for anybody who kind of lost the thread when it came to Camilo had a contract, and the ultimately the question came down to whether or not the option that the Vancouver Whitecaps held that did not involve any opt-in from Camilo, whether or not that's valid. Now, MLS will say, and they may have a very good case, that because that is a collectively bargained situation here in terms of the contracts, that would hold up at least with FIFA, with anybody who might be petitioned to review that contract option. But the question, I think, is really whether or not how far MLS wants to go to defend that practice. If obviously with Camilo, they decided that in the end it was better to let him go. Now, I'm again curious about what that fee actually was, because I think that indicates how much MLS folded in the face of a challenge. But if Cruz Azul kind of plays the same hand, they may play it a different way, or the player in question may play it a different way. Would Cruz Azul is essentially the game? We're going to go after an MLS-based player who's on an option, and MLS will fold and sell him to us at a cut rate, or is it we're going to challenge the option and try to get a player on a free?
No, I would say that this is not 100% equal to what Vancouver, Querétaro, and Camilo had happen. Cruz Azul is a much richer team.
Right.
You know, they have deeper pockets, and I think that what they'll do, if this indeed does come to pass, I mean, we've had, you know, they call it the silly season for a reason, you know, and there's no reason to guarantee that this is going to happen, but to my understanding, this is the way the Cruz Azul would operate, in the sense that they would go approach that player, or maybe contact has already been made, and that player will express an interest. And they'll, I mean, Cruz Azul, again, they're a much richer team. They'll probably save themselves the hassle because they have a limited amount of time to do this.
Right.
They'll go ahead to MLS and to the respective club and say, I'll give you X amount of dollars for this guy. Otherwise, you're going to have a heap of trouble on your hands. I mean, I think that's kind of the ultimatum. Even then, you know, I'm not sure how much money Querétaro paid for Camilo. I'm not sure any of us are certain of that. But I will say that it was most likely below market value. And Querétaro, despite having a multimillionaire mogul owning them, is not the type of team that's going to spend $2, $3, $4 million on a player. You know, I'm guessing that this was 6 figures. And Cruz Azul is much more willing to go into 7 figures because they are that type of team. They don't like to mess around. And quite frankly, they've had some experience with FIFA in which they've had FIFA rule for them. Recently, they had Colombian striker Teo Gutierrez leave them for River Plate. River Plate did not want to pay the transfer fee. They had a protracted legal battle that ended with River Plate positing that money on the very last day that they had, you know, the deal set up. Otherwise, it was going to be canceled, and they had FIFA's full support. I've heard a lot of people say that MLS needs to lawyer up and they need to defend the way that they do business. That is perfectly, you know, understandable in my point of view. And I don't think it's the Mexican league or Mexican clubs. You know, their MO is not to go after MLS talent and really kind of raid that league and screw as many teams and the American League as much as possible. I just think that they sense an opportunity to get talent at a lower price than they would be accustomed to if they were to go and buy these guys in Argentina or Chile or Colombia or wherever it is that they might hail from.
I think it's interesting because in effect, if Cruz Azul follows through on this, again, based on what, you know, sort of verging off of what happened with Camilo, they've got MLS over a barrel, because MLS can either say, no, we've got a contract option, which requires them to then defend that option if Cruz Azul decides to for brinkmanship or the player does, and they take it that far, or they sell it at a cut rate, which is not good for MLS, or MLS has to try to, or the club in question, and therefore MLS, single entity and contract ownership, has to give the player a raise. None of those situations are great for MLS.
No, not really, and I think that the Camilo situation actually helped other leagues, other teams, especially in Mexico, realize that this was an option whenever they had the chance to scout another player that they might be interested in. And I don't think that, in any situation, it's necessarily moral to talk to the player first if that guy is under contract, whatever that contract might be.
Yeah.
I think, the standard operating procedure is you go, either an agent approaches you or a club approaches you, or you do the same. But not the way that Querétaro did with Camilo, and not the way that presumably Cruz Azul is doing with this unnamed player at the moment. Still, I think that time might help MLS for this transfer window. I don't know what it's going to do for them over the summer, knowing full well that, right now clubs have a maximum of 10 days to get any signing done. If there's any sort of legal battle, if MLS wants to resist this the way that they resisted with Vancouver and Querétaro, then it might actually work to their advantage. Cruz Azul might back off and say, well, you know what, this is not going to be resolved in 10 days, so we might as well take a look at another guy. But over the summer, what that's going to do is going to give teams 3 months to make their moves, to go to FIFA, to fight. It's going to give clubs that maybe don't have as deep pockets as Cruz Azul do to basically go ahead and challenge any contract option that they might deem fit. So this is going to get a lot worse for MLS, in my opinion, before it gets a lot better. They might just have the benefit of the current calendar
Right.
To their advantage, they might have 5 months to think about what they're doing and maybe change or edit their policy.
There may be a strategy that has to be put into place between now and that summer window. And this not only applies, this not only is open season on all of those 2+2 players, which is what the most MLS contracts are 2 guaranteed years and 2 option years, 2 team option years. Again, not something that's really common around world football, and something that's been struck down in a couple of different cases. It's not only open season on those guys, it's also leverage in the other direction. Every player who's got a contract coming up or is hitting an option year can say to MLS and their club, hey, look, I'm willing to go the Camilo route and challenge your options if you don't give me a raise. This makes this gives MLS the price tag. It is, regardless of what the fallout is, the price tag is going to hit MLS. In terms of the relationship and maybe pinning down a little bit of the relationship between Liga MX and MLS. I mean, you said it's not necessarily that Liga MX teams will want to screw over MLS. It's about doing business. But is there a sense that that the back and forth or maybe MLS has a player that they can send to Liga MX? Is that stuff getting stronger? Is there any sense that there's a pervasive attitude about one league dealing with another, or is it just a club by club thing in Mexico?
Yeah, I think it's a club by club thing. I don't think that there's any the last time that the Liga MX owners had a meeting, I don't think that they all sat down and discussed this whole MLS thing and say, hey, we can probably go after 20, 30 guys,
Right.
No, this is on a club by club basis. And I think what's going to happen outside of the league structure in Mexico and in the United States and Canada is that player agents that represent MLS talent are probably frothing at the mouth right now, collectively speaking, because this isn't to say that MLS doesn't have a strong economy. They've certainly gotten a lot stronger under Don Garber. He's done a hell of a job there, and they've done a lot of things that have really kind of made that league as profitable, or maybe not profitable, but at least viable than it was in the late 90s. I think that the Liga MX is still a better bet for most players,
sure,
purely on, speaking on salary.
Mm-hmm.
And most DPs will tell you in MLS that, especially if they're South American, they probably got friends in the Liga MX that are making just as much money as they are. Mm-hmm. Once a year, Forbes, the Mexican edition of Forbes, will come out and speculate on how much money these guys are making, because those figures are not made public, and it's not as if the players are ready and willing to tell you how much money they're making. But, we had the deceased Christian Benitez, $6 million. This is a guy that bolted from Mexico to go to Qatar because he was offered $15 million a year.
Well, that's insane. I like Christian Benitez. I liked him a lot, but that's insane. $15 million is insane. Sorry, I just had to inject that. Eric, let me ask you, since we're on this topic, and you said it's not necessarily public, but I mean, we know what MLS clubs work with in terms of a salary cap, which is what they use to pay the bulk of their players. They have three over budget players, and MLS salary, their payroll can be as much as $15, $16, $19 million based on just those 3 players plus the salary cap. In terms of overall payroll, the biggest clubs in Mexico, are we talking 35, 40, $50 million a team, or somewhere south of that? Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. I'd say that clubs like Club America and Cruz Azul and Monterrey and Tigres, those guys are probably paying out in the $30 to $40 million range, because player contracts, the way that they're handled here, is youth guys coming up the youth ranks, players that are maybe 18, 19, 20 years old, are usually signed to long-term contracts to lock them down. And by the time that they break out, or that they get a little older, enough time has passed that they can definitely renegotiate, or they can sell that player for a profit. So only the top-tier guys, only the foreigners, and only the top Mexican players are the ones that are making 7 figures. But I can definitely tell you that it's more than 3 guys on a team. Even mid-range, mid-payroll teams are probably in the $25 to $30 million range. It's not that big of a gap. I would guess that there are only about 2 or 3 teams right now that are paying under $20 million as a whole. And Mexico has turned into a money league of sorts, and those 2-3 teams are the ones that are ironically in relegation trouble.
I mean, and I think that just to kind of frame this, and I think everybody knows Mexican clubs have way more money than MLS clubs to spend. We're talking about, at the base level, 10 times as much on the overall makeup of the team. Rather, again, just to kind of pick out the fact that, the Red Bulls may have a $19 million payroll, but the bulk of that is going to 2 players, and the Galaxy are in the same kind of boat. MLS teams need more money to spread around to the rest of those guys who aren't necessarily on that superstar level. The fallout from this is going to continue. It's going to be fascinating to watch. We don't know. I mean, you've got your sources, and there's no reason necessarily to doubt them. But Cruz Azul could wait. But I think that this is going to come up at some point, and I think it's interesting to see MLS have to deal with the outside world a little bit more. In terms of what Liga MX is going to do with this relationship, you mentioned. I mean, the bottom line is that you can sign a player, or they can go after a player. They see an opportunity to go after a player in MLS and pay less than they might to get him out of South America. Is that the truth?
Yeah, they might pay less to get them out of MLS than they would in South America, because that market is way, way established for Mexican clubs. And South American teams, especially Argentine teams and Brazilian teams, know that they have a base price that they can negotiate with Mexican clubs, and they won't go below that. Mm-hmm. And the risk with dealing with Argentine and Brazilian clubs is that at any time that player that you might be looking at might be bound for Europe, and then you're going to lose them. So you might be willing to overpay, which is what has been the norm for the last, I'd say, 20 years. If you go the MLS route, not the same amount of European eyes on that league than you would have on Argentina or Brazil, but the talent level is similar to Mexico. I mean, a guy like Camilo who broke out and had a career season last year for Vancouver, there's no reason to suspect that he might be a total bust for Querétaro. I mean, I'd say conventional wisdom would tell you that he's at least due to score about 5 or 6 goals if he's given a chance to crack the starting lineup this season. Of course, Mexico playing shorter season, 17 games. But still, it's not just the 2+2 guys. I would take a look at the teams that are in the north of Mexico, that they're bordering the U.S., that they have strong scouting programs like Tijuana, like Tigres, like Santos, like Monterrey, and they'll start to go other routes to get players the same way that Tijuana did with Paul Arriola. I've heard rumblings that, not just homegrown players are up for grabs, but they'll start to analyze the MLS draft, and they'll say, hey, maybe there's a couple of kids coming out of college that are maybe not 21, 22 years old, but they're maybe 19, 20 years old, that we might be able to poach away the same way that we had, say, with the ABA and the NBA in the 70s, or the AFL and the NFL in the 60s. They'll just start looking at whoever these guys are, whoever these teams are picking, and decide to go after those players and say, hey, we'll pay you a lot more money to come down here because we might just need your services, regardless of your nationality, regardless of the fact that you have no pro experience.
Very interesting stuff. Eric Gomez, our friend down in Mexico, covering Mexican soccer, Liga MX, and talking about the relationship now between MLS and Liga MX as it relates to the potential for Mexican clubs to go after players based here. Camilo sets a precedent. Thanks for your time as always, Eric. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks. The bus drivers are also very appreciative. So.
Okay, there you go. All right, let's take a break. Have
a good one.
When we come back, thanks, Eric. When we come back, Dave Kaval, the president of the San Jose Earthquakes, will join us. We'll talk some MLS. Talk about running a club in MLS in a new world where big-name players are coming in. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Jason Davis back on Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Joined now by a third guest of the day, a fantastic guest, San Jose Earthquakes president Dave Kaval is on the line. Hi, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
We're good. I think the audience is good. I'm pretty good. This is it's been a good show, and now we get you on to talk a little bit about the business of running an MLS club. Let's start with the announcement you guys have or the unveiling you have in a week. The San Jose Earthquakes. It says celebrate our new look on the website. What exactly does that mean, Dave?
Well, we have spent the last 18 months really doing a lot of self-examination about our brand, what type of club we are, who our fans are. And as part of that, we developed really a clearer sense of how people view us and how our fans view the club. And in that process, we felt like the current crest and colors and look of the team didn't properly reflect the 40-year rich history of the San Jose Earthquakes. And so we spent almost a year going through a process with the group out of Portland, and really I think almost 200 people were interviewed, fans, former players, folks, to really dig in and say, hey, who are we? What does it mean to be an Earthquake? And as part of that, we're launching a new brand and a new crest next Thursday in San Jose downtown. So it's going to be a huge event, and we should have several thousand people there, and we're really excited about it.
It's interesting. It's an interesting era of MLS, Dave, and obviously the Timbers and the Sounders and the Whitecaps are all kind of trading on their pre-existing history, their pre-MLS, NASL history, and the Earthquakes have a very rich history that way too. Can you sort of give me an idea of why it took to this point? That 40 years is a great excuse to unveil a new look and celebrate the past. But, the Earthquakes have had George Best, and we all know of that history. Why wasn't there more of a connection before?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One, I think at one period of Major League Soccer, there was kind of an aversion to being connected to the NASL. And I think it was because they viewed the NASL as a failed league. And so, I think in the early years, probably MLS 1.0 and 2.0, it was not, very popular or even, something that was condoned. Over time, we were a club, in 2000, the name was reincarnated to Earthquakes. It was the only club at that time that had the moniker from the NASL era. All the other had some other name. And so we kind of were at the forefront, almost a pioneer in that area. And we felt that more recently, the other clubs really invested in that area. And since we're moving into a new stadium, that's celebrating our 40th anniversary, we felt that this was the right time. This was kind of the critical point where we could make that pivot, and it could be done in a way that was appropriate and respected the fan and the connection to the club.
It's interesting that you're celebrating 40 years of Earthquakes history. You're looking forward to a new brand image for the club, and at the same time, you're getting your new stadium together. Now, I know that there have been delays. I imagine it would have been nice to time those two things together.
Well, originally we were going to open the stadium this year, absolutely.
Right.
But we encountered a lot of issues underground. The location where the stadium is a former tank factory. They built the M2 Bradley fighting vehicle for years there. And basically, when we started tearing up the ground, we found all these vaults and basements, sub-basements, and all sorts of madness, stuff that you would have expected. And that delayed the construction. But we felt it was important to move forward in the 40th anniversary year with the rebrand, with the new kind of pivot and launch of the club, especially since the stadium itself will be completed at the end of the year. It's just really at the end of our season. And so we'll launch the stadium in 2015 with the full season starting in March.
Dave, every stadium built for an MLS team is a reason to celebrate and a reason to believe that MLS is not going to be the NASL, the first version of the NASL, that this league is here to stay. But at the same time, there are questions, and people have aspirations for this league. And what I know about your stadium is that it's going to be a capacity of 18,000 to start. Why that number?
Well, the biggest reason was that we were limited by the city and the environmental impact report to have an 18,000 seat stadium. And that was primarily due to traffic and parking and things of that nature. building in California is a very unique animal, and working with all the municipalities and government organizations and the California Environmental Quality Act, all these different things, to fight that and try to go bigger out of the gate, we felt was a mistake. It would have delayed the stadium even longer. So we felt, hey, 18,000, let's get the stadium built, and let's design it in a way that we could expand it. And that's why we have the open horseshoe. People always ask, why do you have the open horseshoe? I was like, well, if we built an 18,000 seat stadium that was fully enclosed, it'd be very hard to add another 5,000 or 6,000 seats. This way, we can do kind of like what they've done in Europe at all the grounds for all the years. We could add another stand in that one end zone and take the capacity up to 23 to 25,000. And so we built it in a way that was modular. We built it in a way that we feel properly reflects kind of where soccer is right now. And we also feel, I think the other point related to that is that we have a good track record of playing very large games at other stadia in the Bay Area. We play at Stanford. We put 50,000 in there. We're playing at Levi Stadium, the first event ever at the new 49ers, $1.3 billion stadium. And that's against Sounders FC. And so those types of events, we feel that those can garner the really big crowds. And so our stadium plus those other venues really creates a property with the Quakes that is a first-tier Major League property, some of the biggest crowds in all of North American soccer, and really a force here in the Bay Area.
That's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of people figured, okay, look, Buckshaw's tiny, and when you play the Galaxy, Stanford Stadium makes sense. But does that mean that the Quakes have sort of positioned yourselves as a regional club in a little bit of a way?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think when we look at, where our fans come from and the connection to the club, it's really Northern California. I mean, it's broader than even just the Bay Area, because we have fans in Sacramento, we have fans in the North Bay, we have fans in Fresno, Stockton, East Bay, Peninsula, the whole thing. And so I think this entire area has a connection to the club. And so we want to make sure that we do events, whether it's a preseason scrimmage or an exhibition or whatever, that properly connect our fan base to the club. And we continue to build that interest in Major League Soccer and in soccer in general in the United States. And I think by having the events in a lot of different venues, you can do that.
One more question I have in terms of the Earthquake specifically, and the player. Well, I want to get to players here in a second, on some level, Dave. But I know the Earthquakes have just signed Tommy Thompson, the first homegrown player for the Earthquakes. You guys are the last MLS club to sign a homegrown player. Why is that?
Well, I mean, primarily because our academy was so late in formation. So, we were the last MLS existing club to have an academy. Our academy is only 3 years old. You had clubs that had academies far longer. I mean, a lot of that was, kind of turbulence and things that happened out of the team leaving to Houston and then coming back. Because in 2008, we were an expansion team. We kind of rushed back. As part of that, we didn't launch an academy until 2010. And so we just didn't have a pipeline like some of these other clubs. And so it took us a little bit of time to make sure that those investments were paying off. And I think the signing of Tommy Thompson, a player of really unique ability, when I first saw him play, I was amazed at how young he was, only 16, and just his deft touch with the ball. I mean, he reminded me a little bit of Simon Dawkins, who we had at the time with the Earthquakes, who's now in the Premier League. Just a player who can do incredible things in the middle of the field.
I think it's easy for a lot of fans to forget that you were an expansion franchise in 2008 after the original Earthquakes, the original MLS Earthquakes left for Houston. There was a reboot in the area. Now, and maybe some people were scratching their heads over that, especially because it did take a while to get the stadium plan in place. But clearly Northern California is soccer rich. How do you sort of accelerate the academy process, or is it just a matter of time? Do you have to be patient with it?
Well, I mean, I think it's about signing players who can really make an impact. John Doyle and I talk about this all the time. There were other players we could have signed like a year ago, but we didn't think it would really develop into anything of consequence. With Tommy, we realized right away he can make an impact on the first team, and we want players like that. And so for us, it's very important to use the academy not just as a PR kind of tool, but as a real way to improve the first team. And I think doing that requires patience sometimes. It also requires investments beyond just the academy. I mean, we have U14, U16, U18, all the different levels. We have a technical director in Chris Leach, who's a former MLS player, who's done an amazing job, who's really elevated the quality of our academy. And then we have other partnerships. We've launched a PDL team this year that'll also give us the ability to bring kids in at a younger level, get them playing time, find a place for them to kind of be nurtured and things of that nature. And so I think those types of investments are really, really important. And then the final piece is really putting a youth team in place where we really didn't have the facilities to do that. One thing as part of our new stadium is that the city is committing $16 million for 4 lighted community soccer fields, turf. And so then we can actually have fields right next to our stadium where we can have training, we can have our academy, and we can have a youth club and all these different things that before was very, very challenging with the lack of fields here in the Bay Area.
Did you a little while back insinuate that perhaps some MLS clubs sign homegrown players as a PR move? Did you insinuate that?
Yeah. Yeah, I did insinuate that. I think there have been cases of that, and I think the league is under a lot of pressure to show that the academy is valuable, and I think it will be valuable, but I think it'll be most valuable when a guy like Tommy Thompson is an all-star and things of that nature. Yes. And you've seen players in the league that have been successful, so it's not like a statement across the whole league, but I think people feel pressure to actually make those signings and maybe move kids who aren't ready or who aren't talented enough to really play at that level. It's
interesting. There's certainly some analysis of the homegrown players at this point, and wondering if these guys were ready when they were signed. Let me ask you about the Earthquakes in what some people are sort of painting as the new MLS. I think it's easy to get carried away there, Dave, but we do see what Toronto's doing, and it looks like a different kind of MLS. How do the San Jose Earthquakes compete in a league where TFC is spending $100 million on players, and you got the Galaxy down the road doing big things with their money?
Well, I mean, I think the reality is the money does not guarantee on-field success. And you've seen that's been borne out. I mean, we play the Galaxy over the last 3 or 4 years, and, I think we've won more than we've lost. We beat them in dramatic fashion, both on their field and our field, when they've had all 3 of their designated players on the field. And so I think the way that the league is structured with the DP system, it's not like you can take $20 million and spread it over your 20 or 25 roster spots. You can have 3 or 4, 2 or 3 selected players who are at a much higher level, but they still might have to play against a guy or play with a guy who's on a league minimum.
Right.
And so I think it's about being really smart about the type of players. It's about really focusing on defense, because I think that's a great equalizer in this game. And it's about having players who, like Victor Bernardes, like Clarence Goodson, like Karatzi, who play together as a unit. And you really have great sense of camaraderie and really almost a sense of family around the team that really gets the most out of these players. And I think we've seen that. We saw that in the second half of the season with Mark Watson in terms of what he was able to do and motivate really the same set of players to have the best record in the second half. We tied for a playoff spot. We lost the tiebreaker. And so I think all those things point to a recipe where, we've had success, won the Supporters' Shield 2 years ago, been in the playoffs 2 out of the last 3 years, and really in a situation where, yes, we will continue to invest in players. We will sign bigger players once we have a stadium and we have more revenue dedicated to that. Mm-hmm. But it can be done in a way where you don't need to have 3 guys all getting paid $10 million a year.
You point to an issue that's going to be pervasive at MLS for some time, and it's the salary disparity. I mean, it's great that TFC is signing Michael Bradley to a $6.5 million a year contract, but that also, as you said, means he's playing with guys on the league minimum. Is there any impetus behind the scenes from MLS owners and the group of people who are making those decisions to bring some, to bring that salary disparity down, or is there any impetus at all to, is there a connection between higher salaries and higher caliber of players, and how do you balance that as a league and as a club?
Well, I mean, I think one thing you have to be careful of is just to take the same players and just pay them more.
Right.
You won't end up with a better team in any way. And so you have to be very intelligent about where the investments are, the type of players we're bringing in. I think on one level, we need more investment in the U.S. player, which I think the academy and guys like Tommy Thompson and people like that are an example of that. But we also need to make sure that the level, the 7 international spots on every club maybe can have a higher level of player on them. And I think a good example of that is like, Karatzi, who we signed, who was in League One, captain of Ajaccio, very, very quality player and someone who I think can make a big impact in our league and on our team. But the thing is that if we didn't have enough salary room and things like that, you wouldn't be able to afford a player like that. And if you could afford 3 or 4 players like that instead of 1 or 2, I think the quality of the entire club will go up pretty substantially. And I think it would be a big impact when we play like the Mexican teams, like in the CCL. We're playing Toluca later this year. I think having 2 or 3 more of those players kind of in that mid-tier area, and when you kind of rank a player or score a player, kind of like a world level 3 player as opposed to a guy who's a 4 or 5, that's where we're going to make the big jump. And I think it's going to happen naturally, but I think, the league has a lot of initiatives, and I think Todd Durbin has done a really good job at the league level, coming up with ways that we can elevate the quality of our players and the folks in the league so we can be more competitive, not only amongst the league, but internationally.
There's a CBA negotiation coming up after the season, Dave, and a lot of people are pointing to the Bradley deal, the amount of money TFC is spending, certainly Dempsey and some of these other moves, and saying, well, look, I mean, it's clear MLS has ambition, and whether or not Don Garber says such and such is losing however much money, it's hard to justify not increasing the salary cap or minimum salaries or however you want to spread it out significantly when you are spending that much money on a couple of players. Is there a response to that? And again, how do you balance those things?
Well, I think it's a challenge. I think at the end of the day, without elevating the quality of our play, we will not be successful as a property. I think everyone agrees with that. The players agree with that. The owners agree with that. The process to do that, is complicated. And obviously it might require multiple steps, and it might require patience, because the key thing is things need to be done in a way that makes sense, for all parties concerned. So I think we're entering a very important era for the league. I think the nice thing is that it's not a conversation about will the league succeed or fail. It's more a conversation of where does MLS fit in the level of world leagues. And I think that's great. The fact that conversation has flipped and changed, I think, is a credit to everyone associated with the league and our fans and U.S. soccer to get to this point.
A couple of questions about your region. We talked about the Quakes maybe being a regional club. First, Alexi Lawless, friend of the show. I'm sure you're familiar with Alexi. He wants.
Oh yes.
He wants to know what would have to happen for San Francisco to get an MLS team. How much of a fight would you guys put up?
Well, that's our core territory. So that would be like asking LA if they want a team, if there would be a team in Santa Monica.
Okay.
So I think that's a core part of our territory. We feel that we know statistically we get a lot of fans from the area. We get very high TV ratings. So no, that's not in the cards anytime soon.
Well, is there nothing to the idea? We see the league putting another team in the New York market. Is there nothing to the idea of a local?
Well, no, I don't think there's anything to the idea. Maybe at some point when the league is at a certain stage, you could support a team in both places. I think the challenge, and I think it's a real challenge, and you can ask the Warriors or the 49ers who move down south, a facility in that area is extremely difficult to pull off. And, figuring out the way, first, our stadium's completely privately financed. You would really struggle to get any public assistance with something like that. And so the economic rationale to do that might be really challenging.
Yes.
And so I think that's probably the biggest hurdle to doing it. By the time you got started on it right now, it might take you 10, 12 years to pull that off.
Sure.
So,
San Francisco.
But like I said, maybe long term, there you could see in the same way that like in London, how many teams are in London? Like 15 or 20, right? So like, in really high density areas where there's a lot of soccer interest, you can support a lot of teams.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. San Francisco, obviously, as you mentioned, very difficult place to get land, and costs are high and everything else. I think another question related to the area, Northern California. I've been asked to ask you about the Sacramento Republic. Now, I suppose what I'm asking is, why are the Earthquakes not partnering with the Sacramento Republic?
Well, that's kind of an ironic question that you asked that. So I can't really comment on our affiliation other than say that we are going to have an affiliation with the USL Pro Club, but we're not going to field the reserve league team. And, very soon, I think it'll be obvious in terms of like what decisions we made and what teams we decided to partner with. We're just not prepared to make that announcement yet.
Okay. That's fair enough. It's Dave Kaval, the president of the San Jose Earthquakes. Lots happening with the Quakes. 7 days until the big unveiling of the new look for the San Jose Earthquakes in their 40th season. I think what's the hashtag? Quake74? Is that the hashtag, Dave?
Quake74, yes.
There you go. I appreciate your time, Dave. Amazing insight. Thanks a lot.
Have a great day.
You too. All right. Look, I love that stuff. I love getting a little bit of a peek behind the scenes. I mean, look, there's only so much Dave's going to give us, clearly. But I think he was rather candid about a couple of items there. I do find it interesting. And look, the Quakes being rebooted after the original team, the original version of the MLS Quakes went to Houston and having to start from scratch and getting their academy sort of going a little bit later than everybody else. I mean, that's one reason for being the last team to sign a homegrown player. But I do find it very interesting that Dave says some MLS teams have been guilty of doing it as a PR move. And not only is that unfair to the player, because if he's not ready, why are you signing him? He could go off. I mean, some of these guys do go off to college and come back as homegrown players and end up signing. A lot of them stop their college careers. Maybe they would have been better off playing 4 years of college. Now they move outside of the scope of the homegrown player rule when they do that, and then they end up becoming draftable players, and maybe you miss out. I don't know. It's an interesting balancing act, but that MLS is doing. Producer Vince, are you on the air?
Oh, yes, I am.
You got some hum in the background. What are you doing?
I don't know, actually. There's nothing on right now.
Okay, so what's on your mind? Are we talking about the World Cup bid? Is that what I'm supposed to be talking about now?
No. We'll save that for another show.
Okay.
I have a question for you about what you were talking about earlier about that grade. I read that article too about the underclassmen and the draft.
Yeah.
Like I had an idea of because it's always long term, right? Don Garber always stresses the long term goals of MLS, and I do feel that eventually one day MLS is going to wage a bloody war against the NCAA, telling them basically we don't want college players anymore when the academies are in full blown thing. But for now, what I was wondering, and I want to get your opinion on this, would you think it would work if teams, let's say a team sees a really good player who is an underclassman, and MLS makes a rule saying that you can draft an underclassman, and they then have the decision to make: do they go ahead and sign with MLS, or they can continue their college route while that team then retains the rights to that player, and then if that player, and then the team could decide to trade those rights or get rid of them or what have you. Do you think that could possibly work?
I suppose in theory that could work. I mean, we're talking about a Larry Bird type situation. Basically, the Celtics drafted Larry Bird a year before he actually decided to leave school and go play as a professional, and maintained his rights. I suppose. I don't know. I don't know how much of that would be collectively bargained. I don't know if there are eligibility rules. I don't know if you can be drafted by a professional team and still maintain your eligibility. Again, if you don't have an agent, I guess you could. I don't know. There's some intricacies to that, Vince. I mean, I think in theory it kind of sounds like a good idea, but I think there's some intricacies to that I'm not going to be able to speak on expertly, and I hesitate to say, yeah, go for that.
All right then. I do have a question though. Our drafted players are paid a lot more than homegrowns, right?
I don't think necessarily. No.
Well, because I was reading because I know Kofi Apari is making, I think he's making the league minimum, while someone like Chandler Hoffman, who hasn't even broken into the LA thing, I think he makes almost double of what Kofi makes. And the reasoning was, if you're drafted, you have to offer the player more money. I don't know. I'm not saying that's how it works, but that's just something that I was wondering about.
I'm not positive about that. I mean, I'd have to look. I mean, generally GA contracts are bigger contracts than senior contracts. Seniors coming out get less money than a Generation Adidas player. It's kind of the part of the glamour of the GA designation is here. You're going to get $100,000 right off the bat, whereas a player coming out as a senior may only get 50 or 60. I really don't know. I'm not the salary guy in MLS. First of all, there are, again, so many rules, so many variations, so many different ways you can classify players and so many different tiers of players that it's very difficult to keep up. I don't really look at salaries until the players union spits it out, and that's the only reason. That's the only place we get it anyway.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. I'm interested to see how this all plays out in the future. I mean, MLS is always going to be in that weird position of, oh, we want to be like Europe, but oh, we're in North America, so we got to go by North America's rules.
Yeah, it is a strange little niche to occupy. Thanks for the call, Vince. Appreciate it, man.
No problem, man. Take care.
469, you're on the air.
Hey, this is Noe from Texas.
What's up?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the Falcao injury and the
I hadn't
going to affect the World Cup.
I hadn't gotten to that yet. I got a couple of minutes left in the show. Yeah, Falcao, the report's out right now. Falcao, torn ACL, likely done for the World Cup. You don't typically come back from a torn ACL in 6 months. That's a big blow to Colombia, while noting that Colombia has significant amounts of talent to lean upon.
Yeah, I heard earlier in the morning that maybe Freddie Montero may have a shot to replace him. What did you hear about that?
I haven't heard anything. Look, I think it's logical, and I'm familiar with Freddie clearly because he was an MLS player with the Sounders, and now he's tearing it up in Portugal. I think it's logical to assume that Freddie Montero benefits in terms of his possible inclusion in the World Cup team. But again, Colombia's got a lot of talent, and he could still be left out. You think, okay, a guy who's scoring for fun in Portugal has to be in there, but they have Jackson Martinez. They have a lot of talent in this team right now, and he could be left out, and they could still be very, very good and make a run into the quarters or semis. So, I have no idea what this means for Freddie yet.
Yeah, I have a few Colombian friends that are kind of freaked out, and I told them, hey, your chances are still the same because you have depth in the striker position.
The depth that they have is amazing. I mean, the depth that they have is absolutely amazing. And
I just hate the fact that we're going to lose a star in the World Cup.
Yeah,
that's the disappointing part.
From a neutral observer's perspective, or from just a soccer fan's perspective, not to have Falcao in the World Cup is and especially in South America. I mean, look, Colombia's a long way from Brazil, but they're still, it's still a South American World Cup. It'd be great to see that guy in that tournament. All right, I got to run. I'm out of time. I appreciate the call from Texas, man. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, bud. No problem.
Right. There you go. There's our show for Thursday, January 23rd, 2014. Trevor's just rolling off Colombian names because they've got so much time. I'm looking at their current squad. This is from a friendly in November, a couple of friendlies in November. Falcao, Gutierrez, Martinez, Baca, Muriel. I mean, it's again, they have depth. They have plenty of depth. Quintero, as Trevor mentioned, and that's 6 forwards. And if you take out Falcao, they've got plenty of forwards. They don't necessarily need Freddie Montero. All right, we are on iTunes, ratings and reviews. Help us out. We need to climb those charts a little bit more. At Soccer Morning, NASN has a page. Go find that as well. We have an Android app. You can get the show on Stitcher and TuneIn and iHeartRadio, right? So listen to the show in whatever means, any way you need to. Follow us on Twitter, Soccer Morning. Follow Trevor and bug him, Hey Hayward, because I like doing that. Anything else? Nothing? Nothing. Is that it? We cover all of the news? Probably not, but we got most of it. And we will be reaching out. If you did contribute to the Indiegogo campaign, we will be reaching out to you very, very shortly, so hold on for that. Thank you to Brooke Tunstall, Eric Gomez, Dave Kaval. We'll talk to you on Friday. Bye.
The days on the boulevard I landed. We used to kick routines and the presence was fitting. It was I, the